So we finished the book of Romans last Sunday. So the question I get asked around the end of a book is, well, where are we going next? What are we doing? What are we doing next? What's next? What's next? What's next? I do like to give some Old Testament mixed in with New Testament. And so we are going back into the Old Testament, way, way, way back into the Old Testament to the very first book of the Old Testament. We are not going to cover the totality of Genesis, but we will cover the Joseph story in Genesis, which starts in Genesis chapter 37. So we'll be in Genesis chapter 37 today, but you can't appreciate Genesis chapter 37 unless you really understand what went on kind of before Genesis 37. So I'm going to give you some background today, and then we'll read a little bit of Genesis chapter 37 about this man known as Joseph. The story really picks up for Joseph's story with Abraham. Abraham was a man living far from the promised land, and God called him. He said, Abram, I want you to come to a land that I will show you, and I will give it to you and your descendants, and y'all will live there, and you will have more descendants than can be counted, sand on the sea or stars in the heaven. You will have a land that is flowing with milk and honey that will provide for all of the needs of your growing family, and you will have, you will be a blessing to the entire world. Those people who bless you, Abram, will be blessed. Those people who curse you will be cursed. All of the world will be blessed through you. And so Abram goes from Ur of the Chaldees, walks roughly over to what is known as the Promised Land now, and begins to live there. And God blesses Abram with more wealth than he could have imagined. His livestock were plentiful. He began to obtain more land. Everything he did was good, except he could not have a son. And in those days, sons were vital to your whole family structure. If you didn't have a child, as a male child, to pass your stuff down to, it would go to some other male from somewhere else. So maybe it would be your cousin, or in Abraham's case, one of his servants was the closest male heir that he could muster. Eventually, God does give Abram the child that he promised him. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. Isaac lived and found himself a wife, Rebekah, and after a period of about 60 years of Isaac's life, they had twin boys, Jacob and Esau. Jacob was younger, Esau was older, but God had ordained to bless Jacob and favor Jacob, and so God kind of put his hand on Jacob, and Jacob was a son of a gun. I mean, Jacob cheated his brother out of his inheritance. I say cheated. His brother technically sold his inheritance for a cup of stew, which is not a good deal when your family is as wealthy as their family was. Some of y'all, cup of stew might be more than your inheritance is going to be, so that may be a good deal, but I promise you, for Esau, it was a bad trade. It was a trade he should not have made, but he was a man who was driven by his appetites, and so he made the trade. He said, I'm starving to death. I'll do anything you want. Later on, when Isaac is on his deathbed, Jacob deceives his father into blessing him, thinking that he was blessing Esau. After that created a family rift that was seemingly to be irreparable. Esau wanted to kill his younger brother. And so Jacob fled and found a place to be with some distant relative, Rebekah's family relative, at a house of a guy named Laban. And he lived there, and he noticed Laban's daughter was quite good looking. This is his younger daughter, and he said, Rachel, you are the woman I want to marry. And so he goes to Laban and he says, what do I need to do to secure marrying your younger daughter, Rachel? And Laban says, work for me for 7 years and you can marry my daughter. And Jacob says, well, that's fine. I mean, if I go back home, my brother wants to kill me, so I might as well be here. So he worked for 7 years to marry this woman that he thinks is going to be the love of his life, and was truly the love of his life. goes to his future father-in-law and says, hey, it's been 7 years. It's time for you to give me my bride. He says, you're right, it's been 7 years. Let's have a party. Let's get you married. And they have a party, and it's one of those parties that everything begins to turn kind of fuzzy and blurry as the night goes longer and longer and longer. Or some sort of marriage takes place. Jacob is not in full use of his faculties during this time. He wakes up the next morning in his marriage bed. He looks over, and it is her ugly big sister in bed with him, Leah. Now, that is not fair. He worked 7 years for Rachel. He wakes up next to the ugly big sister. Now, I call her ugly. You say, Matt, that's mean to call a woman ugly. The Bible describes her as weak in the eyes. It doesn't mean that she couldn't see well. It means when you saw her, you wish you couldn't see well. Okay? Leah was not the woman that Jacob wanted to marry, and he was predictably upset with his now father-in-law of his ugly bride, and he goes to Laban and he says, Laban, this is not what we agreed to. And Laban's like, oh, you don't understand. In our family, the older must get married first, and so, we had to marry Leah off, and kind of the unspoken thing there is like, and no one was going to marry her, right? And so he kind of pulled a fast one, and he's like, look, I want Rachel. And he's like, well, you've got Leah. He's like, no, I want Rachel. He's like, work 7 more years for me, and you can have Rachel. Sure enough, he marries Rachel, works another 7 years for Laban, but now he's a man with 2 wives, which is not the biblical precedent. It's not what we're supposed to do. If you've ever been married to 1 wife, you recognize that's plenty, right? That's good. One's the right number. 0's okay. But one's. If you're gonna have one's the number, okay? And so Jacob has 2 wives, and because he has 2 wives, he has tons of problems, and he hates Leah. We do this sometimes. Leah is sort of a tragic character in Jacob's life because she's unwanted. She's reviled by Jacob, and it's really none of her own doing. Her father put her in that situation. Her father organized all of that. Like, she's just sort of caught in the middle. It's not her fault that she's ugly, right? Like, she's just caught in the middle of all of that. And the Bible says, Jacob hated her. But he had marital obligations to her, and so on whatever schedule they had, he would go into her, and God blessed Leah. Just like God blessed Jacob when Jacob didn't make sense to be it as the younger son, God blessed Leah and gave Leah boys immediately. Leah had 4 sons, bang, 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 bang. She had Reuben, she had Simeon, she had Levi, she had Judah, back to back to back. Rachel could not have a child. The beloved bride, the one that he had pined for, worked 14 years for, she could not give Jacob a son or a child at all. Rachel begins to get frustrated with this. I imagine with the sisters can sometimes bicker and fight. I've seen this in my house. So I know that it happens. I can't imagine the family dynamics that this family is under, where they're married to the same man, and it's a mess. It's every bit of as messy as you think that it can be. Rachel is beginning to get more and more frustrated. Maybe Leah's doing some na-na-na-na-na. I'm giving him sons and you can't. I don't know. But Rachel is tired of it, and so she grabs her maidservant, the woman who works for her, and she says, you go into my husband and marry my husband, and you give him sons for me. And so now Jacob picks up a 3rd wife, more or less, the concubine, the maidservant of Rachel. This is Bilhah, and God gives Jacob 2 sons through Bilhah. This is Dan and Naphtali. Leah, not wanting to be outdone by her sister's conniving, takes her maidservant. What was that? Zilpah. Great names, by the way, if you're looking for a daughter's name out there. I know you're having a little girl, right? Zilpah. Put it on the mind, Castillos. Zilpah Castillo. Sounds great. And so Zilpah. And she says, just what you did to Bilhah, do for my maidservant Zilpah. And sure enough, two sons are sped out, Gad and Asher. Leah's feeling pretty good about herself, so much so that God gives her 2 more sons. This is Issachar and Zebulun. And then eventually gives her a daughter. The only daughter that we know that Jacob had is Dinah, and she is born to Leah. We are now 10 sons in to Jacob's life. Sons are a sign of blessing in the Old Testament. It's a way for your wealth to be expanded, more people to work for you, more people to serve the family. It was a huge deal. And the fact that he had 10 sons and 1 daughter was a pretty good sign of divine favor on his life. But his preferred wife still had not given him a son. And she was bitter, and she was sad. And Jacob would be like, look, like aren't I worth like 10 sons to you? Like you don't need to worry about it. I love you. Jacob truly loved Rachel. But after a series of years, eventually Rachel does get pregnant. She does conceive, and she bears Joseph. A few years later, she bears Benjamin, and that is the story of the 12 sons of Jacob, also known as Israel. The 12 tribes of Israel come mostly from those 12 sons. There's some corrections in there because Joseph has 2 sons that are included, and Levi doesn't have a spot because he's everywhere, but we'll get there later, I promise. So Joseph is born. He is the child of the favored wife. He is the child that was long expected. He was the child that Jacob always wanted. And when Benjamin was born, Rachel died in childbirth. So those 2 boys were all that were left of his wife that he loved. And so Joseph was treated in ways that probably looked unfair to the other 10 brothers. Joseph was treated in ways that was almost certainly unfair to the way in which the other 10 brothers were treated. And they were older, obviously. There's a series of years between Reuben and Joseph. You know, you've got to imagine there's a lot of years in there just to make 10 children in line there. But Joseph comes along, and we don't hear much about Joseph. The story takes a turn. We hear a little bit about Esau. We hear a real terrible, tragic story about Dinah that we won't recount today. And then in chapter 37, Joseph rises up out of nowhere in the biblical story, and we get to hear a detailed accounting of his life. If you're in your Bible, read with me in Genesis chapter 37, starting in verse 1. It says, Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and they could not speak peaceably to him. We'll stop there. So what we see is the very first sign of the character of Joseph. Joseph is out pasturing the flock. He's doing the work that he's supposed to do as a 17-year-old in the family. And he's out there with a couple of his brothers. It says it's Bilhah and Zilpah's kids, so that would be Dan and Naphtali and Gad and Asher. He's hanging out with these 4 guys, and he comes back in from the field and he says, Dad, your sons are not doing what they're supposed to do. And we don't know exactly what the sons were doing in the field that brought about the need for a bad report, but we know that it was bad enough that Joseph felt compelled to share it with his dad. And you know, I have a variety of children, and my last name is distinctive. I'm a Higginbotham, if you're unaware of what my last name is. And there's plenty of us, by the way. Most of you probably have met one other one out in the wild out there. There's enough of us out there that you'll run into us occasionally. But it's a distinctive enough name that I promise you, people ask if you're related to somebody all the time. Right? If you know another Higginbotham, you probably have come to me at some point and said, hey, are you related to so-and-so Higginbotham? And my answer is almost always, yeah, I assume, right? There's not that many of us, but I don't know. I don't know who that person is, right? But what I've told my children, because my name is so distinctive and it's saddled on them everywhere they go, and I have a position that requires some degree of my kids not acting like turds in the public, right? It's like wherever you go, like you carry my name. Like you're a Higginbotham, and so you can't get away. Like you're not a Smith. You can't get away with it. There's not, you reflect back on me. And so remember that when you're acting like an idiot, that you're dishonoring your father. I imagine Jacob had a similar view of his sons. They're out in the fields, they're raising Cain and causing problems and getting into all sorts of mischief out there, bringing dishonor to his name. Joseph comes back as the son who has a good character, and he reports on his brothers. Joseph is seen here as a faithful son surrounded by unfaithful brothers. This is important because this is going to be a lot of Joseph's story, as he is this faithful person surrounded by faithless people. And so he's faithful to what his dad wants him to do. His father gets upset with his brothers, and he elevates Joseph, and he gives him this coat of many colors. That's how it's translated in the ESV. Ultimately, we're not sure exactly what that coat is, but we do know this. When Joseph put it on, all of the brothers knew, he is. We didn't just think he was the favorite. You know, like some of you may think that your brother or your sister or whatever is or was the favorite. They probably were, honestly. But like Joseph is Jacob's favorite. The child of the favored wife, the child born to him at old age, and Joseph is given this gift by Jacob to mark him out. The cloak that he's likely given is a long sleeve coat that goes down to his feet. Let me tell you something, that is not a working man's wear. Right? If you're shepherding, you're wearing something that's going up to about your knees so you can run and do whatever you need to do out in the fields. You're not wearing something that goes down to your ankles and down to your wrists. It was a way for Jacob to say, this guy right here, like, he's never lifting a heavy finger again in his life. I got 10 sons to do the hard work. This son, he's mine. And the brothers absolutely hated him. Verse 4, right, says, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and they could not speak peacefully to him. It's tragic, by the way, that this created a rift in the relationship in the family. It's also weird that it was like it wasn't directed at the right spot. You know, you think the brothers would be angry at their dad for showing favoritism. But that's not the way we are, right? We don't get angry at the authority. We get angry at the one who is receiving benefits when the authority gives them away. And so Joseph is receiving all of this animosity. He's receiving all of this hatred. They can't speak peacefully to him. They absolutely hate him. Guys, that's not a good thing in a family. Maybe you've been in a family that's had division like this, deep fault line division that goes inside of it. You know how damaging that can be. But Joseph is stuck growing up among these brothers who want nothing but evil for him. And to cap it off, Joseph now has a series of dreams. Let's read the dreams. We'll talk about the dreams. We'll explain why these dreams matter. Verse 5, it says, now Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field. And behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it, and they bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Joseph has a dream. He didn't choose to have this dream. Dreams are going to matter in the Joseph story. This is the first time we have symbolic dreams in the Bible. Before that, when God would want to communicate, he would just send a messenger and show up. When God wanted to talk to Abraham, he would send the angel of the Lord and he would talk to Abraham. It's just when God was dealing with Adam and Eve in the garden, he would just show up and be like, hey guys, why are you hiding? Excuse me, guys. This is symbolic dreams. The first time they show up, why is God using symbols in these dreams? Well, it's because it's going to be useful for Joseph in about 40 years when he needs it. He has this dream. It's the sheaves, and his sheaf rises up. His brother's sheaves bow down to him, and it is not a hard dream to interpret. You don't need to be a master in dream interpretation to understand what he's saying. He's saying all 10 of you guys are going to bow down, and Benjamin too, I guess 11 of you, are going to bow down to me. I'm going to be elevated. You guys are going to be prostrated. This is what our relationship is going to be. Now, I don't think it was necessarily in Joseph's best interest to share this dream with his brothers, right? It feels like the sort of thing that might make them hate him even more, and it did. But he shared it with them nonetheless. Maybe he thought they needed to hear it. Maybe he thought there was a word in there for them. They did not like it. And then, verse 9, he dreamed another dream. Good job. And then he told it to his brothers. And he said, behold, I've dreamed another dream. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So he has another dream, and this time it's the sun and the moon, which is kind of Joseph's mom and dad, right? The people out there, and you have the stars gathered around, and all of them are doing the exact same thing, bowing down to Joseph. Why are they bowing down to Joseph? Why are they falling down before Joseph? What's that all about? Well, it's the same meaning. There's going to come a time when every part of that family is going to be underneath Joseph's authority. It's coming. And so Joseph shares this with his brothers who already hate him. And it does not smooth things over. They hate him even more. Their jealousy for him continues to increase. He tells it to his dad. His dad's initial reaction is like, that is ridiculous, son. We are not going to bow down to you. I'm your dad. There's not a moment in my life that I'm going to bow down to you. But if you look at the way it ends, it's like, but then Jacob kept this saying in his mind. Kind of turned it over in his head a little bit. The rest of his life wondering, well, why would he have a dream like that? His brothers weren't thinking about the why behind the dream, right? They just knew they hated and they were jealous of this brother. So what's the point of these dreams? What's the point of the beginning of the Joseph narrative? Well, there's two things. One is, right, God looks for faithful people in the midst of unfaithful people to accomplish his purposes. Joseph is a faithful person in the midst of unfaithful brothers. And God chooses Joseph to accomplish what is going to be needed. Joseph becomes the only reason that Jacob's family survives is because God took Joseph and led him through the wilderness and through all the nonsense that he's going to go through so that his family could be saved. Right? God, in his providence, in his understanding of the end, chose Joseph for a purpose. Now, you have a response to that. Man, I'm sorry. I could really use water, but I don't think I have any around here. You have a response to that. That God is still in the business of choosing people to accomplish purposes. Sometimes we want to be the ones that God uses to accomplish specific purposes. And someone else is raised up. How do we respond in that situation when someone else is raised up? Do you respond like his brothers? Are you jealous? Are you envious? Do you want what they have? Do you want the position they have or the platform that they have? Right? Or are you like Jacob? Do you recognize that maybe, just maybe, there's something in there for us? Guys, I don't know what God's ultimate plan is for your life. I don't know what God is going to try to accomplish in your life. But I do know that God is still working providentially his plan forward. And sometimes it's not about us. Sometimes other people are going to take the lead. Sometimes other people are going to take the ball that we want and they're going to run with it under God's direction. And when that happens, what we got there? Breath mint there? Hey, we're moving in the right direction. Thank you. See, it's caught on in the back there. You're welcome, Rob. Woo, minty. All right. right? Sometimes someone else is going to get the credit. Sometimes someone else is going to get the chance to run. And if it's not you, right, maybe that's God's will. And we support others who are making those runs. You know, one of the things that we're called to as Christians to do is to support other people who are working in the ministry, who are actively moving things forward for the sake of the gospel. So I want to encourage you. DJ came in through with the clutch. Where did you find a bottle of water? My goodness. There are other people who are running ahead of us. And we may want what they have. We may want to be where they are. We may think that we have all the gifts and skills and that God should be using us instead of them. But if God has put them on that path and God has ordained that they're there, we support them as we can, as they run the race that God has put before them. Instead of being envious and jealous, working against them, we support them. I think about this when I think about our missionaries. We've got missionaries around the globe serving, bringing the gospel message. And we're back here and like we can say, man, I'd like, people to recognize me for what my service and my sacrifice is. But maybe it's not your time. Well, it's probably not your time. So can you get on board with those people who are going? Right? Or are you going to grow bitter towards what God is doing in other people's lives? Joseph is super important in the life of his brothers. He's actually going to save his brothers' lives. They just don't know it yet. You may not know why God has you where you are. You may not know why God is using that person to do the thing that you think you should be doing. Trust God today. His plans are better than yours, and they're fully fleshed out. And he already knows the end that needs to be met and the steps that have to go to get to the end that has to be there. Why did Joseph share these dreams with his brothers? Why would he do that? Well, ultimately, his brothers needed to ultimately hate him enough to betray him, to set him on the path that he needed to be on to save them. All right, God had a plan in place. I want you to know God still has a plan in place today. You have a part in God's plan. Maybe you're the one getting elevated up and your sheaf is rising above the rest and you're going to have the attention and the adulation of those around you. Probably not. Probably not. Probably like me, you're following others. You're supporting them as they go. Well, let's do so with a happy heart, knowing that God has a plan in mind. God knows the end from the beginning. We have a God who sees all and can even use wicked people and wicked ideas to accomplish his good purposes, which is the main point through the story of Joseph. Let me pray.